Hello and welcome back to another video. Today I'm doing my 25.9 mid lane tier list. So, if you want content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. We saw buffs towards Annie. She gained some compensation buffs because they over-nerfed her in the previous patch. She was quite undershot. So they have given her decent amounts of power and actually landed in about where she was in 25.7. We saw nerfs towards Neferi. She is obviously very performant in the mid lane and in jungle at the moment, so she did warrant these nerfs. She is, I believe, being nerfed again going into next patch. We also saw buffs towards Orianna. They were more quality of life adjustments, though. It has very slightly shifted her. If you were already Q-maxing, then it incentivizes you to continue Q-maxing, but there are different ways of playing Orianna. You can go like the 3 points W into Q-max. You can go all points into W Q-max. We've even seen like vice versa, 3 points Q, W max. But there's different ways of playing her. And then we also saw the nerf towards Roa, which is the main thing this patch. It has done a pretty hefty amount to move certain champions around. Some champions were using the item as a crutch. Some which like used it as part of their like main core, but like Nivea, Cassiopeia did lose genuine power from this as well. So does have a worthwhile amount of talking about to do. So Vegeta then. Vegeta is going to consist of the same champions, excluding Annie, who has been bumped up quite a bit. Sporter remains here. His champion obviously has been pretty underperforming in mid lane for a while. This champion had a bunch of changes to try and push him out of the mid lane. I believe he's being buffed in 25.10, so that is something to be aware of. Maybe we start seeing the resurgence of Smolder solo lane, but right now it is in a pretty bad spot. Only ever really used as a counter pick, and still a pick I wouldn't really be recommending. Tristana is doing better than Smolder. Probably not a pick I'm going to recommend either. I think this pick does perform considerably better in the bot lane. Another champion which has been nerfed or adjusted to try and push her out of the solo lanes because she has been quite oppressive there and they don't particularly want to maintain that long term. She is still seeing competitive play though. People still perform well on this champion. I do think she can still have merit as a mid laner. Just not a pick I would consistently recommend playing in solo queue, especially when AD junglers are a lot more common in this environment. Other picks within the D tier include the likes of Corki, who is, I'd say, probably even higher than Tristana at the moment. He is still a okay mid lane option. None of these three D tier picks are like unplayable. They're just not as performant as some of the other options in the higher up tiers. Ziggs also within the D tier. This pick has been underperforming for a while. All four of these champions just perform better in the bot lane. That is where they have kind of been rebalanced for. However, you can still play them as like a flex option into the mid lane if you so want to. The pick which I was going to originally drop down was Twisted Fate, but there are like certain things around Twisted Fate at the moment. Number one is Roa got nerfed. Roa is his core item, that sucks for him. Swifty's got nerfed. That was his core boots. That also really sucks for him. He's definitely lost a genuine amount of power from that. The third thing is though, Twisted Fate had a Victorious skin this patch, which has really heavily deflated his win rate, so it makes it very hard to gauge just how much of a mover these changes were. I'm going to leave him in the bottom part of the C tier, because he is definitely powered down and definitely one of the weaker mid lane options to go to at the moment. Whether he's all the way into the D tier, time will tell. Obviously, the whole skin thing will probably end up being readjusted going into 25.10, but there are also a ton of major item changes going into that patch, so I wouldn't recommend playing Twisted Fate at the moment. I think the champion is just in a slightly weak spot, so you could argue he probably does just warrant a D tier position, but there is some level of like kind of akin to LeBlanc where his win rate is just deflated by new players picking up the champion and just not performing very well on him. I still don't really recommend him though. I think he's genuinely weak. Azir, I'm kind of contemplating also dropping back down to the D tier. I had Azir in the C tier because the pick was performing relatively well, like better in solo queue, not like well by any means. You need to still put a ton of games into this champion, and he is still already, I mean, he's still a competitively skewed pick, relying on like team coordination, like really precise placement of like soldiers to make the most out of this pick, and I just don't really recommend that for like average elos. I think it is just a skill which you can kind of like build up over time, and then reckon like where around masters, where if you're a mid laner you should probably start picking up Azir and just learning the champion as you go through. I might drop him back down to the D tier for that reason. The other picks within the C tier are the likes of Gangplank, who is also a pretty hard champion to play in the mid lane. Outside of like Solar Backer, it's probably just the best person to watch. He performs really well on the pick, both mid and top lane, and yeah, he's a good resource. Like he makes good resources, which are like worth using to learn the pick. Even then, though, I don't think Gangplank's in the greatest of spots, and he probably sits as more like a mid to low C tier option. Brander's just weak. He should be strong in for this Edo bracket, and I have just left him in a pretty bad spot. He sits as a low C tier option. Not much to say on that one. Case of Jace, he's a solid AD pick in the mid lane, also quite hard to play though, and that kind of restricts how much I can recommend the champion. But if you're comfortable playing him and you're like comfortable playing like the lethality, Yomu's, phase rush, maybe opt into like a hubris every so often build, then yeah, you can get results on this champion. Probably sits more like a high C-tier option and like continuously gets higher the more like the higher elo and the more you've put time into this champion. Aurora sits within the C-tier. She's just not that performant for average elo. She's kind of ended up being more of an elite skewed mid laner, and even in elite, she's not one of the like most insane performing options. She's just a good option there. For average play, though, it's not a pick I'd really recommend unless you're willing to once again put a lot of time into the champion. LeBlanc is an okay AP assassin. I don't think she's breaking any like boundaries at the moment, like how strong she is. She is just going to be less performant for the average player, along with like some of the other assassins in the beta. I don't recommend these champions as much because I think they rely on like obviously being very comfortable on the picks and just putting a lot of time to them, and then like factors which sometimes are just not as consistently inside your control, so they're not picks I tend to recommend as much. Gragas I think is also slightly maybe under the bar for like mid and jungle. Top I think he's fine. If there's any role I recommend playing Gragas, it's probably top lane. Well, I got after this patch, and if you do opt into Roa, then yeah, it's unfortunate you are going to lose some power there. I believe Seraph's Rosh Gragas is also quite performant at the moment, and yeah, you could probably opt into some AP builds, especially with some of the changes in 25.10. So Gragas might jump up the tier list relatively soon, but right now I don't really recommend the champion. But if you already play it, then yeah, you can continue to play and probably still get decent results. Mel sits towards the top end of the C tier. I don't think the champion's terrible. I think she's got some level of merit. I also think she can be really powerful if like in the right game scenarios. I just think she's still slightly under the bar. She could probably be do with being a little bit stronger, but right now she sits as like a high C-tier option. With some of the mage changes, I could also see her bumping up to the beta, so another champion worth watching. Right now though, I mean, it might be worth picking her up and learning. It's just be interesting to see how it goes into next patch. Rise and Kassadin dropped from the beta to the C tier. They lost genuine power from Roa being nerfed. These two champions use Roa consistently. It is one of their core items. And yeah, the item's weaker. You've lost 50 HP and 5 AP on item completion, and that sucks for these champions. Moving up into the B tier then is Kennen and Morgana. These are new additions. In the case of Morgana, she got buffed this patch and was already a relatively okay mid lane option for average elos. Like the lower down you go, the more performant this champion is, the more consistently people just won't dodge your Q, and the more consistently you can just get the damage from your W. In a more coordinated environment, you need setup to play this pick, and oftentimes you need her like in very specific like lane matchups to really be valuable. I don't think she's an amazing pick, but she does have some level of merit to being played. So Morgana mid, I'm gonna have her as like a low beta option at the moment. If you're comfortable like learning a new champion and actually having some level of like surprise, because she is just not that common as a mid laner, and I think Morgana can be an option. And then Kennen mid. So Splinter has been like dominating Korea in solo queue, playing Kennen mid. I think this pick is really good. If you put a lot of time into him, I think he is very solid. Like, same with top lane. I think Kennen mid is a really underrated top lane. Kennen top is a really underrated top laner at the moment. This champion does a huge amount of damage, can bully a lot of picks out of lane. He's very reliant on his spacing, and I do think that lends to him being quite a difficult champion. Not a pick I'd recommend for everyone, but if you're comfortable playing a pick like Kennen, and then once again having that surprise factor where people won't understand how to play against Kennen mid, then I think this champion is a very solid B tier option, and even higher if you put a lot of time into him. Other picks within the B tier remain the likes of Asol, who's actually been seeing some competitive play. I'm honestly surprised, because the general perception of Asol is he's just not that amazing at the moment. In mid to low elo, he does oftentimes get to those like high stack points where he can be really valuable, scale, like stall out games, but his laning phase is weak. He loses to a lot of AD champions, and he does suffer quite badly from that in solo queue. So the pick is a I think he's fine. I think if you're comfortable playing a champion like Aesop, then you can play him. But I'd recommend if you're looking for like a dot mage, which can scale relatively well and just like kind of stall out and clear waves, and Malzahar is just going to be my recommended pick at the moment. Some of your tank options in the beta include the likes of Sion, who I think is very solid as a mid lane option. Sion top and Sion mid have relatively similar problems where he's just not that high agency as a champion, but he is a great weak side or just like stonewall champion. People, most picks just can't really get through him, and he does a deceptively large amount of damage early on to the game. But he's a great competitive tank at the moment, but you do sacrifice agency in solo queue, and that does make him a little harder to recommend in an environment where I'd recommend leaning more towards carry and like individual agency champions. Malphite, not identical. Malphite actually has an AP build which he can go every so often and like really good spots, and with Malignance being buffed in 25.10, don't be surprised if Malphite becomes a bit more popular and stronger even. Like, I think this pick does have spots where he can be really good. Fulmo was a better item. I think this pick would be very good in mid lane because you could play the AP into AP champions, and then you could play tank into like the AD pool. I just don't think it's fair at the moment, and that kind of like marks him down as like a more mid to low end B tier pick. I still think he's easy to play and can be bought out in more spots than probably perceived with the AP build, just not quite enough to really like warrant moving up. Some of your AD assassins like include like your Zeds, your Talons, your Kianas, your Akshans, your Katarinas, which can all basically scale with how much time you've put into the champion. That is like the main lever for these picks. Like Katarina, when you first time a champion, she's like one of the worst picks in the game. But if you put a lot of time into Katarina, you understand how to execute the combos, this pick can dominate solo queue. It can be a really powerful way of climbing. And it's the same goes for a lot of these B tier assassins. I think they really do scale with how much time you've put into them. The likes of Talon, Kiana, Zed have really, really good lethal thresholds. You just have to know the lethal thresholds. And if you can snowball those advantages, they can also just take over games. Same for Fizz. Akali's a bit different. I'll separate Akali. But yeah, these assassins kind of like all fall into the same branch. Some of them do better in like specific matchups though. Like Fizz, you traditionally want to play him into like mobile mages, which don't really have the tools to ever lock him down, and he can just easily get onto and assassinate. Akali is a bit separated because I think Akali's a bit better, like a more general assassin. You can actually opt into and play Akali if you haven't played I should rephrase this better. Akali is a champion which I don't think you need as much time on to really like start off the curve and like still get results on. I think she is still a relatively matchup dependent champion or like composition dependent champion where you want to play into the right comps to really get a lot of value out of the pick, but having her just within your pool can be a really valuable thing. And I think if there's any assassin which I really recommend to have as an option, I think Akali's number one, and honestly something like LeBlanc could be a good number two if those are like the picks you're looking for. I think they are really good AP assassins to have access to. Other picks within the beta are the likes of Yone, who is actually not that performant at the moment. Yone is definitely a champion on my watch list. I think he sits towards the low end of the beta, and I could probably drop down to the C tier for average play. I will continue to like monitor and watch this champion and see how he performs. But right now, yeah, definitely not as performant. The latest set of nerfs did hurt him for average play. It was something, I mean, just generally, actually, it hurt him, like losing 2% of, I believe it's maximum HP on the W is meaningful, and it means he has to just like do another, like I think it's like another 2 or 3 sweeps like within lane to kind of like get back some of that damage he is going to be losing. So yeah, meaningful damage loss there. Definitely sits towards the lower end of the beta at the moment. And the other picks within the beta remain Zoe and Orianna. In the case of Zoe, she's a fine AP like a mage assassin. This pick got buffed in 25.8, and she is doing better from it. She clears waves better. I think Zoe's just another champion which kind of falls into the same vein as like the other AP assassins here, where if you put a lot of time into Zoe, she will give you good results. If you haven't put a lot of time into Zoe, she's probably just not a pick I'd really recommend unless you enjoy that playstyle, and that goes for a lot of these assassins. The other pick which remains in the B tier is Orianna. Orianna is, where is Orianna? Orianna received a change to her Q where the mana cost goes from 30 to 50 to just 35 flat. it basically did nothing. I didn't think it would. It was it reminded people Orianna existed, and I think to an extent that's fair enough. It is a placebo buff after all, but it also helped the average player a bit more, where they do consistently just default on maxing Q, and it made Q max less punishing on the mana cost. So Orianna, yeah, sits as a solid B tier option. I still think she is a good champion to have within your pool. She's just a bit below the bar at the moment, but very slightly. Like, Orianna could comfortably compete with some of the A tier options. I don't think she's like far off by any means. Silas drops down from the A to the B tier. He was using Roa as a crutch, and Roa being nerfed drops him down slightly. He's a bit more counterpick reliant at the moment. I think that's probably a safer place for Silas to be. However, with some of the mage changes going into next patch, I wouldn't be surprised if he finds his way back into the A tier. He's a very explosive and volatile champion, and the smallest changes can really mean quite a bit for this pick. So yeah, Silas, a champion worth watching. Still a champion I recommend learning. He's fun. Like, I think Silas is just a very cool character design, and has a lot of things which really go for him. I mean, like, the ult is one of the coolest ults accessible in the game. Personal opinion. The A tier then. So A tier leads off with Nico, who has been gaining traction more recently. I think people have realised Nico is a very good champion still, and her pick rate had quite heavily declined in mid lane. She was becoming more and more of a support, and she is still mostly played support, but I think mid lane and support Nico do end up being picks you should probably learn if you really enjoy that kind of playstyle. Obviously, she's really unpopular, and you probably won't run into a lot of Nikos, but if you're trying to play competitive, or you want to go to a higher MMRs, I think she's a very valuable champion to have at the moment. So probably recommend learning her, but not mandatory by any means. There are picks which I do recommend over her at the moment. Vex is a great counter pick. I think that's the main merit of playing Vex. You can pick her into very specific matchups and shut them down, and then snowball and take over. She's not a mandatory pick. I think she is just a champion which is nice to have within your pool if you are looking for a good counter pick. But yeah, not a pick which, I mean, she's not that popular, so most people won't play Vex. Garen sits within the A tier. The nerfs have tapped him down slightly. He's still an okay mid lane A tier AD pick. You can opt into him every so often, and you should be able to get decent results. Quinn, however, I do recommend over him still, even with the symbiotic souls change. I still think she's a great option. She's still a great A tier AD pick as well. Heimerdinger sits within the A tier. I have a friend who is a very big Heimerdinger enthusiast, and he's been spamming Heimerdinger mid, and doing relatively well on him. Like, I think this pick is a good champion. Like, I think if you're very comfortable playing something a bit more niche, kind of like the Quinn, kind of like the Heimerdinger, it can get you good results. People won't understand how to play against it. That goes for a lot of top laners, or even some of the supports which aren't as commonly played in the mid lane at the moment. People just won't understand the matchups, and that can be a really big edge to have over them. Ari sits within the A tier. She's still above the bar. I still think she is a good option to have within your pool. She's definitely weaker though, especially if you go Aurora build. I think Blackfire Ari has definitely looked a lot more promising as of recent. I believe the Blackfire Torch change has got reverted on PvE, so they're going to still remain the same as live. So Blackfire Ari, a pick which I do recommend maintaining within your pool. I think Ari is a great champion, very mobile, good utility, decent damage as well. Like, she's a bit of a jack of all trades within the mid lane, and I think her safety net does give her a lot of merit in this role. Talia probably sits towards the high end of the A tier at the moment. She's been gradually creeping her way back up in the mid lane. She is already a very performant, competitive mid laner, and I think for solo queue, she definitely sits towards the high end of the A tier. It wouldn't surprise me if down the line she ends up getting nerfed for the mid lane, but right now, yeah, she's definitely doing a lot better. Definitely sits towards the higher end of the A tier. Aurelia isn't as performant at the moment. Another champion which I'd say is probably worth watching. She is getting close to the B tier. The pick has not been, as of recent, performing as well in the mid lane, and yeah, that is definitely something worth watching. So still a pick which I do recommend continuing to play if you already play her. Probably not recommend learning her though at the moment. She's a bit on the downwards, but we'll see like how that progresses over time. Pantheon is on the upwards. If you are looking for an AD pick which is performing really well in the mid lane at the moment, I think Pantheon is a great option. Whether he ends up getting hit by a sledgehammer soon, I wouldn't be surprised. Pantheon is he's doing decently across all of his roles, and jungle Pantheon's really taking over competitive for the most part, so yeah, probably gonna end up being nerfed at some point soon. But for the moment, he's a great A tier pick. Sits towards the high end, definitely a champion I recommend playing as like a counter pick primarily. But a great AD option at that. Some of the artillery options include the likes of Vel'Koz, Lux, and Xerath. I think all these picks are in a very solid spot at the moment. They all have different merits. Like Xerath's range is absurd and it can make him a very powerful counter pick and very strong in certain compositions, especially if you enjoy that playstyle. For case of Lux, her wave clear and her burst potential are very, very high. Gives her a lot of value in most situations. Vel'Koz, not as long range as the likes of Xerath, but has so much value as a champion. I think he is very, very powerful in the right spots as well. Can be vulnerable if blinded. He's not, yeah, I mean, I recommend playing him as a counter pick, and most artillery mages I would recommend as counter picks. If you play them in the right compositions, they can be very valuable champions. Echo is doing very well at the moment. Sits as a high A tier pick in his current state. The buffs he received not too long ago, combined with the buffs towards domination keystones, helped him, and he sits as a high A tier option. In the case of Lissandra, I missed her. She should be in the B tier. She sits somewhere towards the high end of the B tier. Akin to like Vex, for example. She's a great counter pick option. She's probably a bit on the weak side at the moment. It would honestly be nice to see some Lissandra buffs. I think she's a champion which can be exciting to see every so often in competitive and solo queue. Other picks within the A tier remain the likes of Syndra, who, even with the nerfs she received not too long ago, she is still a relatively performant A tier option. She's still a pick I just recommend having within your pool. I think she is a great mage to have and just play every so often. Hui is also another great mage which I recommend everyone learns or has within their pool, because I think he has a lot of spots where he can be really valuable as a champion. What else have we got here? Veigar. I'm actually going to drop Veigar towards the lower end of the A tier. The Rowan nerfs also impacted him a bit. He's not quite as performant, and yeah, probably sits towards the lower end of the A tier. And same goes for Victor. Victor is also on the downwards. Both these champions were using Roa primarily as a crutch, and are just weaker because the item has been nerfed. In the case of Victor, I believe he can swap to Blackfire, and it is still a performant item on him. In the case of Veigar, I believe you can swap to Archangels, and that seems to do quite well. And I've even seen some people sit on the likes of Catalyst, on just generalistically a lot of the Roa champions, so that is something you can do if you are looking to get the HP and the mana gain from that item. So there are ways of working around the nerfs, but sometimes it can just be sitting on Catalyst for the most part. The other picks within the A tier includes the likes of Kayle, who is still a very performant mid laner. This champion has been doing well since the beginning of this split as both a mid laner and a top laner. She does struggle into certain matchups, and if you're into a composition which has the tools to kind of punish you a lot early, that can be quite a struggle for Kayle. You do lose a lot of agency early on to the game, but you do trade it for a lot of agency later on. So the lower down you go tends to be a bit more performant, but I think generalistically Kayle is a pretty solid option at the moment. So yeah, I'd recommend having her as a pick if you play her, and even learning her if you enjoy that kind of play style. Swain sits towards the high end of the A tier. His champion is a great counter pick, and into certain compositions, he is one of the best picks within the game. He just got buffed not too long ago, and he's just kind of been riding that for a while. Don't pick him as a blind. I think he can be punished by long range compositions and certain compositions which have the tools to kind of deny what he wants, where he kind of just wants to stack, and high damage comps can be quite punishing for him. So yeah, pick him well, and he should be an incredibly valuable champion to have. Annie has basically landed where she was in 25.7, just slightly different playstyle. I think the pick will probably benefit from some of the mage changes going into next patch, especially if the likes of Ludens is buffed. She is still, I believe, using Malignance as her core item, with the likes of Shadow Flame and Storm Surge as her second option. She's back to being an A2 option. I think if you already played her, yeah, you'll probably continue to play her, and you should still be getting similar to results back from 25.7. Other picks within the A tier are Cassiopeia, so I'm going to drop Cassiopeia down. She's actually not that performant. She got nerfed by Roa being hit, that was meaningful for her, but she hasn't been quite as performant in the mid lane. She could have honestly been dropped even before the Roa nerfs. I think this champion hasn't been, just doing as well. A lot of the popular options are ranged and have, that's just, that goes without saying. A lot of the options are just like assassins or ranged, and that can be punishing for her. She does well into champions which don't really have the tools to kind of like burst or chunk her out early, and yeah, like are forced to play into her where she can utilize her durability and her kiting potential to kind of like get value in those situations. And I think when Silas is less popular, Cassiopeia ends up being a bit weaker because she really benefits from that kind of matchup. But yeah, Cassiopeia sits towards the middle of the A tier now. I still think she's a great option if you do play her, but weaker, not quite an S tier option anymore. So the S tier then, I will lead off with Anivia, who is definitely weaker with her being nerfed. She's still a great champion though. I think if you already play her, you'll continue to play her. Would I recommend learning her? I mean, it just comes down to preference. I think if you don't enjoy Anivia, you're not going to play Anivia. Like, if you don't really feel this champion, then yeah, I mean, it's probably not worth learning. But if you already play it, then yeah, you'll continue to play it. I think Anivia's pretty agnostic at this point. She rarely becomes weak. They tend to buff her pretty quickly if she's like below like the S tier even. Cho'Gath remains as an S tier option. Even with the Symbiotic Souls changes, he is still performing very well in the mid lane. He is receiving more changes in 25.10. I believe he's having his Q nerfed, but he is having his E buffed. And honestly, he'll probably just end up being relatively similar to the S tier. I don't see him going away anytime soon. I think this champion is a very solid pick, which most champions really struggle to move him out mid lane. He scales really well. Yeah, his laning phase is great. His the tools he provides are just very valuable. And albeit it's quite hard to land some of his skill shots sometimes, as there's a lot of movement speed within the game. Swifty's got nerfed, and that is meaningful for him. Champions are losing. A lot of champions are just losing 5 movement speed, so he will benefit from that. Neferi still remains as an S tier option, probably like a mid to low end S tier option. Honestly, Yasuo can kind of sit next to her. They're both really solid AD mid lane options at the moment. I mean, I have them in the S tier for a reason. Neferi is considerably less popular than Yasuo. I think Yasuo is just my recommended default option. If you play Yasuo, you should continue to play him. If you don't play Yasuo, you probably should learn him. I mean, he is just one of, if not like the most popular mid laner for the most part, and yeah, he's a great pick. So yeah, definitely recommend learning this champion if you want an AD pick within your pool. But if you want something a bit more niche, then yeah, Neferi, Pantheon, definitely champions I recommend going towards. Other picks within the S tier are the likes of Malzahar, who is very low elo skewed. Like, I recommend this champion less the higher up you go. If you're like Emerald, Diamond, then he probably sits more like an A tier option, and if you're like Master, then probably like a B tier option. But below Emerald, he is one of the best ways of climbing. I mean, most people know it at this point. He just performs so well in those elos. People won't punish him. He's allowed to just freely like push waves, kind of like roam to sides, and it really trivializes one of the more challenging parts of the game, which is like managing waves and like CSing. So yeah, Malzahar still a very recommendable S tier champion. Vladimir's been on the rise, and he has continue. I mean, he now maintains his spot within the S tier. I think he's a great option to play, and he is a two-way flex. So if you want to play him top lane and you want to play him mid lane, he is a great pick in both roles in his current state. Galio is still my recommended AP counter pick. He still performs really well. He's easy to play. He's very durable. Has great wave clear. Not got quite as much agency as some of the other AP options here, but yeah, his ease of play and his durability combined with his wave clear and the fact you can work on low econ, it's just a very valuable thing to have. I think Galio is a very recommendable champion for that, and oftentimes if you ban one AD pick, that should be enough a lot of the times. And then Diana is probably my number 1 recommended pick. She is incredibly powerful in laning phase. Like, Diana is one of the strongest laning champions within the game. People just don't respect or don't respect or don't expect the strength of this champion within laning phase. So that is the main thing to go off of, like just abusing how powerful your Q sweep is through like for wave clear, for trading, and then utilizing your ultimate for like quick burst down potential. I think this pick is just a very powerful champion at the moment, and definitely my number 1 recommendation in the mid lane. That being said though, I think there's a lot of good picks, and it really does come down to what you're comfortable with playing at the moment. I think like you can easily drop down to like an A or even a B tier champion if you're very comfortable with them, and then still outperform the S tier options. I think the C tier and the D tier picks have issues which kind of prohibits them from being as recommendable, but even if you're comfortable with them, then you should still be able to get decent results. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.